Artemis 2's launch mount is on the roll, we take a look at Astra's finances, and could SpaceX recover a booster without human intervention? I'm Elysia Segal for NSF. It's Friday the 18th of August, and there's much more to come this week in Spaceflight. As with most publicly traded companies, Astra released their second quarter 2023 earnings report, and let's just say their net profits may be sliding in the wrong direction. Over the last few weeks, Astra has laid off approximately 25% of its workforce and, according to the report, has reallocated roughly 50 engineers from manufacturing and launch services to space products. Astra's Space Products division provides electric propulsion systems for constellations. These engines, called Astra Spacecraft Engine and Astra Spacecraft Engine Max, run on xenon or krypton and generate between 18 and 60 millinewtons of thrust with a specific impulse of between 1300 seconds and 1800 seconds. The cuts are an attempt to save Astra approximately $4 million per quarter, but those savings won't start until the fourth quarter of 2023, as the company offered 60 days of severance to laid-off employees. The company says that it has continued to closely manage its financial runway and evaluate strategic opportunities in support of long-term sustainable growth. The second quarter of 2023 saw a generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, gross profit of $300,000 and a GAAP net loss of $14 million. Astra's adjusted net loss was $33.7 million, with an adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization loss of $33.1 million. At the end of the quarter, Astra had $26.3 million of cash and cash equivalents on hand. This means at the current cash burn rate, Astra had under 1 quarter of cash for operations. However, the company did raise $10.8 million net in additional cash through a direct offering with an institutional investor in August, with the potential to raise an additional $50 to $65 million through an additional offering of its common stock. Astra noted that if they are unable to raise substantial additional capital in the near term, they would have to scale back or end operations. Okay, that's enough numbers. Let's talk about the spacecraft. This quarter focused a lot on Astra's spacecraft engine side, with the announcement of the first 4 shipments of Astra spacecraft engines out of their Sunnyvale spacecraft engine manufacturing facility. Now, on the launch service side, Astra has been continuing to focus on the development of Rocket 4, which has had several new launch contracts signed, such as with the U.S. Space Force and Defense Innovation Unit and NASA. However, it's unknown how progress may be stifled by the reduction in workforce. Looking forward, in the third quarter of this year, Astra will continue to invest in their space products business and the development of Launch System 2, with teams expecting to deliver 8 to 12 Astra spacecraft engines. So, do you think Astra will survive? We really want to see Rocket 4 fly. NASA is getting ready for Artemis 2 with the rollout of Mobile Launcher 1 to Launch Complex 39B. In continuation to the next milestone in the Artemis program, flying the first humans around the moon since the 1970s, NASA rolled out the ground structure that will carry the SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft to the launch pad for Artemis 2. Mobile Launcher 1, or ML1, is a massive steel structure that stands nearly 120 meters tall and masses just under 5 million kilograms. The structure has several umbilical arms and swing arms that connect to SLS and Orion, providing power, communications, coolant, fuel, and other services. The mobile launcher also has the sound suppression system, a tower with an elevator and stairs for crew access, and a flame deflector. This week, ML1 was transported by the Crawler Transporter 2, a tracked vehicle that can carry over 8 million kilograms at a speed of about 1 mile an hour. The journey from the vehicle assembly building, where ML1 was stored, to LC-39B took about 2 days and covered a distance of 4 miles. The rollout began on Wednesday, August 16th, and arrived at the top of the pad on Thursday. Now, the purpose of this rollout was to conduct a series of tests and upgrades on both the mobile launcher and launch pad. These tests include a timing test to validate the launch team's countdown timeline and sequence of events, a washdown of sections to remove any dust and debris from installation, lowering the engine service platform that allows access to the SLS core stage engines, positioning of both side flame deflectors in the flame trench, preparation of the ML-1 umbilical arms and other subsystems for fueling operations, and testing of the pad's new 5.3 million-liter liquid hydrogen sphere and emergency egress system, aka those super fun zip lines that can be ridden down in case of an emergency. So, maybe not that fun at all. After all of these tests are complete, the ML-1 will return to the VAB for rocket stacking operations, where the SLS core stage, solid rocket boosters, ICPS upper stage, and Orion spacecraft will be assembled together. Then it will roll back out again to 39B for a wet dress rehearsal, where the SLS and Orion will be fueled and tested as if it were about to launch. Artemis 2 is currently scheduled to launch in late 2024, and we can't wait to see those 4K images of the lunar surface from the crew as they fly around the moon. We are truly living in an extremely exciting era. Now let's take a look at This Week in Launches. On Saturday, August 12th at 1726 UTC, a Changzheng 3BE successfully launched the LSAR-401 synthetic aperture radar satellite from Launch Complex 2 at the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China. This will mark the first SAR satellite launched to geosynchronous orbit, which will provide China with unprecedented all-time Earth observations in a non-interrupted manner. The satellite was placed into a 184 by 35,189 kilometer geostationary transfer orbit inclined 28.56 degrees, which corresponds to GEO 1839. On Monday, August 13th at 5:32 UTC, a Kuaizhou 1A rocket lifted off from the mobile launcher pad at the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China. On board were the head 3A, B, C, D, and E payloads, 5 commercial ship and traffic automatic identification system tracking satellites. The satellites were placed into a 695 by 705 kilometer orbit inclined 45 degrees. This launch marked the 22nd Kuaizhou 1A mission and 20th successful one. This week we also had a Falcon 9 that successfully launched 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites to low Earth orbit. Liftoff took place on August 17th at 3:36 UTC from Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida. The booster, B-1067, was flying for a 13th time, and it landed on the drone ship a short fall of gravitas. This marks SpaceX's 143rd booster landing in a row since the last booster landing failure. On July 30th, the U.S. Coast Guard received approval from Congress to run a pilot program to evaluate the use of autonomous vessels, waiving existing navigation regulations for marine assets in the program. The use of this in relation to spaceflight was explicitly mentioned, with the statutory note saying that authorized activities include 1. Remote over-the-horizon monitoring operations related to the active at-sea recovery of spaceflight components on an unmanned vessel or platform, 2. Procedures for the unaccompanied operation and monitoring of an unmanned spaceflight recovery vessel or platform, and 3. Unmanned vessel transits and testing operations without a physical tow line related to space launch and recovery operations, except within 12 nautical miles of a port. This will allow for a further reduction in SpaceX's fleet size. Historically, SpaceX used to send up to 5 marine assets out for one launch: the drone ship, a tug, a support ship, and up to 2 fairing recovery vessels back in the day of SpaceX attempting to catch fairing halves. Teams have been reducing this significantly. The fairing recovery ships, tugs, and support ships were combined into just a single ship, Bob or Doug. However, due to the Coast Guard's mandate that SpaceX cannot leave the drone ship by itself and travel over the horizon, they've had to have an additional ship out, usually a tugboat, which keeps an eye on the drone ship during fairing recovery, which happens further downrange. Now, this has generally worked quite well for SpaceX due to their very high launch cadence. They've been able to keep 2.5 marine assets out per launch, with one boat switching between recovery operations of East Coast missions. However, with this new order from the Coast Guard, SpaceX will be able to have only 2 boats per mission. Bob or Doug will tug the Autonomous Spaceport Drone Ship, or ASDS, to its landing zone and provide support, where it can leave it to go to recover the fairing halves. While allowed under this new regulation, it is highly unlikely that SpaceX will ever have the ASDS head to the landing zone by itself once 12 nautical miles away from port, like SpaceX has mentioned before. But let us know in the comments, do you think that we'll ever see a drone ship propelling itself to the landing zone? Now let's take a quick glimpse at some other stories across space. Following March 29th Centaur 5 incident at Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, where the stage suffered an anomaly, this week, ULA CEO Tory Bruno announced teams had finished welding the reinforced Centaur 5 forward dome onto the rest of the tank. The new tank has a thicker forward dome, which is now welded with laser and resistance arc welding. When pressed if ULA teams are going to conduct another wet dress rehearsal, Bruno noted that the decision has not yet been made. This week, Russia announced a delay to its next-generation crew vehicle, Oryol. The spacecraft's first flight is now scheduled for 2028, although it seems likely that further delays will happen. Development for this vehicle started in 2009. The spacecraft is set to be launched atop the Russian Angara A5 rocket. This week, a local notice to mariners was posted by the Coast Guard indicating that SpaceX is eyeing the second launch of Starship to occur no earlier than August 31st. It's so exciting to finally have a more concrete date. See what I did there? After so many vague timelines from Elon. But that being said, I wouldn't buy your tickets just yet. There's still work left to do both on the hardware and paperwork side of things, but we may be really close to seeing Starship fly yet again. As always, you can bet there will be more talk about this and more on next week's episode of Starbase Update. And now, let's go over next week in spaceflight. Following the launch of Luna 25 on August 10th, Roscosmos is set to attempt to land on the moon for the first time since the 1970s on August 21st at a currently unknown time. The lander will attempt a landing near the lunar south pole, just north of the Boguslavsky crater, where the probe has a planned one-year mission duration. Later on the 21st, Progress MS-22 will undock from the Zvezda module on the International Space Station. Progress docked with the ISS on February 9th, where it brought up 2,500 kilograms of cargo. Following the undocking, the cargo spacecraft will burn up in Earth's atmosphere a few hours later. Hurricane Hillary in the Pacific Ocean has delayed the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket with the Starlink Group 7-1 mission. It is now scheduled to launch no earlier than August 22nd at 6:04 UTC from Vandenberg. On August 23rd at 1:08 UTC, a Soyuz 2.1A will launch the Progress MS-24 resupply mission to the ISS. With Progress MS-22 now out of the way, the spacecraft will then dock at the Zvezda module of the ISS on August 25th at 3:49 UTC. SpaceX's Starlink Group 611 mission next week will take the Starlink constellation to over 5,000 satellites launched. The 5-hour launch window for Falcon 9's liftoff from Slick 40 opens at 47 minutes past midnight UTC on August 21st. Adding to the list of lunar landings next week, the Indian lunar lander Chandrayaan-3 will attempt to land on the moon as well. It will also be near the lunar south pole and is scheduled to occur on August 23rd at 12:17 UTC. Following an aborted launch attempt due to an engine issue, Rocket Lab rolled back the Electron rocket for repairs and is now ready to launch again. The 4-hour launch window is currently scheduled to open on August 23rd at 23:30 UTC. A Falcon 9 is set to launch Crew Dragon Endurance to the ISS on August 25th at 7:49 UTC. The Crew 7 mission will see Jasmine Moghbeli as the spacecraft commander, Andreas Mogensen as the pilot, and also host mission specialists Satoshi Furukawa and Konstantin Borisov. Endurance is then set to dock to the Zenith port of the ISS Harmony module on August 26th at 6:02 UTC. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. We'll see you all again next week to recap This Week in Spaceflight.